My flight was delayed for over an hour due to what the airline called a minor technical issue. I don't like flying at all, so this didn't do much for my confidence. Honestly, the news that the plane I was going to spend more hours on than I would have liked, flying mostly over water, broke down before we even boarded, turned the trip into a nightmare for me. At least it was a pleasant surprise to me that we, after a tremendously bumpy flight, landed safely. With a sigh of relief, I walked out of the terminal building into the heat of a Florida afternoon and eventually climbed into the large air-conditioned limousine waiting for me. Although the thought of having to make the return trip in a day or two was still rolling around somewhere in the back of my head, I had more important things to do at the moment. As I got out of the car at the hotel, I was once again very nervous. I was in an unfamiliar city, in a country I had only seen in movies and on television. Unfortunately, mostly crime shows. Those are not the kind of shows that give you confidence in your safety when visiting those places, especially if, like me, you don't travel much. Anyway, as I got out of the car, I was somewhat relieved to find that I was immediately recognized and called out by Paul and Della, the people who had organized the evening. "Hi, Mike, we weren't sure you'd make it on time. We'll get your bag and check you into your room. Now you better get going, it's waiting for you in the lobby," said Della. Paul nodded at me in greeting and headed to the back of the car to retrieve my suitcase from the driver. "Thanks, folks. Sorry to keep you in suspense, but my damn flight got delayed," I said, and, trying to look as confident as possible, headed through the revolving door into the cool interior of the air-conditioned building. I must admit that I hadn't expected the place to be so grandiose. The hotel lobby was gigantic, and there seemed to be several hundred people wandering around, though there were no more than 30 or 40. How the hell did they expect me to find a woman I've never seen in my life in this God knows where? I asked myself, as an extremely attractive woman suddenly appeared in front of me, dressed in a small red, clearly designer, cocktail dress and holding a matching clutch in her left hand. "Mike?" she asked with a charming smile. Yes, Holly?" I muttered back, somewhat taken aback by her unexpected beauty. Under the circumstances under which we'd met, Holly was nothing like I'd expected. Holly smiled again, and then, taking me by surprise, wrapped her arms around me and kissed my cheek. After getting over the initial shock, I mustered up the courage to reciprocate. "When in Rome and all that, as my father used to say." "Sorry, it's probably an English trait. We don't usually embrace women we've never met before, at least not often." By then, though, Holly and I had been emailing for months and had spoken to each other on the phone more than once, setting up this little meeting. I really didn't know what to expect. "Did you have a good flight?" she asked. No flying suits me anymore, Holly," I replied, then explained. "A few years ago, I made a very hard landing, not that it was an emergency. The airplane was a mess, but I guess the local scrap metal dealers were pleased. In any case, it somewhat undermined my confidence that transportation is heavier than air. If only I had known that I would be greeted by such a beautiful lady upon my arrival here. Plus, I'd be lucky enough to spend a whole evening with her, then maybe the flight wouldn't have been so bad." "Thank you. You know, they say the English are not romantic. You have made a very fine point. I am very flattered that such a handsome gentleman paid me such a compliment." "That's not flattery, Holly. In fact, I find you so beautiful that I have to wonder how we ever got into this situation in the first place. I'm not sure if it was embarrassment or nervousness that made me babble on and on. Come to think of it, I usually never talked to a woman or flirted with her the way I did with Holly over the next few hours. Thinking back on what I'd said, I had to admit that most of the time I was talking complete nonsense. My mom always said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Mike. Maybe some people's eyes don't see what other people see," replied Holly. "My father used to say that familiarity breeds contempt. Perhaps that's where we're headed. Change of country, change of, bed partners. And another saying I also remember is that change is as good as a vacation." "You're depressing me, Mike." "I'm sorry, but the last few months have been very depressing for me, except for our correspondence with you." Holly smiled. "I would have thought you'd be pretty upset about that." "Oh, make no mistake, that's the way it was, Holly. But then I started to enjoy our little letters and conversations, and I began to look forward to them so much. I'll be honest, for weeks now I've been looking forward to coming here and meeting you in person. And I'll add that if I had seen your picture, I would have flown to Canada weeks ago already. That might spoil the surprise for us, What if you were recognized? Holly, I looked her over from head to toe. If I'd known how beautiful you were, well, the hell with the surprise. I still can't figure out why you picked me. I thought it would be ironic, I suppose. Anyway, who better than Mike Crosby, 34, married to Emma? Holly pulled a long face. It's been 10 years, they don't have kids. Rumor has it that it's Emma's choice. Mike is a maintenance manager at a hospital near their home. A job he hates, by the way. Mike has a handicap of 3 when he plays golf with friends every Saturday morning, and he's a killer spin bowler, whatever that means, at the local amateur cricket club he trains with on Tuesday evenings and plays for on Sundays during the summer. Gosh, aren't you thorough? Exclaimed I. No, not me, Mike, but the people I hire. I have some pictures of you in white suits. Holly had a questioning expression on her face for a second, probably doubting if she'd gotten the name right. You look very elegant in them. Those pictures are probably the reason I chose you as my secret lover this evening. She smiled at me and winked slightly. I think you're flattering me, Holly, I replied, smiling. But I also remember thinking, I hope she didn't mistake my cricket box for something it isn't. Fortunately, we were interrupted at this point as Paul and Della, the couple who had met me outside the hotel, approached us. The boy took your bag to Mike's room. Now are you two ready for the big show? Asked Paul. Same as always. How about you, Holly? I asked, tossing the ball in her direction. Yeah, I think I'm ready, she replied. Looking somewhat reserved, I thought, considering we were going through this whole farce at her insistence. Look, Holly, you don't have to do this, you know that? Once we get there, you'll realize there's no turning back. I can even go there myself if you want. Don't be silly, Mike. That would defeat the point, wouldn't it? Do you really think I came all the way from Montreal to miss out on all the fun? Come on, let's do it! Mike, do you have anything for Paul? Asked Della. Oh gosh, sorry, yes, Paul. I pulled a thick envelope out of my pocket and held it out to Paul. He added it to several other envelopes of the same kind that he'd gotten from somewhere, then sorted them into an order that seemed to suit him and put them in the inside pocket of his jacket. As he did so, I noticed that he was carrying what I understood to be a firearm in a shoulder holster. I remember thinking to myself, Gun Jesus, these guys are gambling! Okay, shall we go? Said Holly, taking my hand. But then she looked at Paul and asked, Intimate enough? I guess I should have felt awkward, but somehow I didn't. Come on, guys. Married or not, you all know what it's like when a good-looking woman comes a little closer than she should. We all have instincts that can, if allowed, take over in such circumstances. My basic natural instincts were definitely taking over. Although I was still very nervous, I couldn't think of any reason to try to control them. No, it seems a little more familiar to me, doesn't it, Della? Replied Paul. Yeah, come on, guys. You're 2 people in love having a secret rendezvous away from your spouses, so make it look believable, replied Della, sounding like a movie director. Without further ado, Holly wrapped her left arm around my waist and her right arm around mine. Then she pressed herself very close to me. Normally, I would have thought that was awkward. Yeah, that's the ticket. Let's do it and don't forget all those sticky eyes. Della chuckled. That won't be hard, replied I, looking at Holly beside me. Hey, watch out, Holly! Looks like our Mike might be on the prowl, commented Della. Holly didn't answer, or rather couldn't answer, for when I looked down at her, she caught me off guard again and sank a kiss on my lips. Sorry, Mike, she said, sensing my embarrassment. I should have asked, but I need to make sure my lipstick is convincingly smudged. Holly, when you want to smudge your lipstick, don't bother asking. Maybe I should get a full-time job as your lipstick smudger, I said, and kissed her. Yeah, it's not every day you get a chance to kiss a woman as beautiful as Holly. Don't get married, I'm only human. Sorry to interrupt the conversation, but are we doing this or not? Because if you want, we can get right to the bedroom scene, said Della, laughing. Maybe later, whispered Holly with a giggle, and tugging lightly on my waist, dragged me towards the hotel lounge. For all her bravado, I sensed that Holly was nervous almost as much as I was, so I took the comment as nervous chatter. Entering the waiting room was a bit of a surprise. It was pretty crowded, but I noticed that a few guys were showing more than just mild interest in the stunning woman in the little red cocktail dress pressed against my side. Not that I could blame them. It was costing me a huge amount of effort to keep from staring at the incredible cleavage Holly was showing off in that dress. I think I looked like the cat that ate the canary. It had been a long time since I had felt so proud of the woman I was accompanying. Paul and Della took the lead, and we followed them to a table against the wall, which magically became vacant as we approached. The two couples sitting at it moved to the tables on either side of it. I noticed Della and Paul nodding their heads, as if to acknowledge everyone present. Paul insisted that he and Della sit with their backs to the wall and watch for anyone approaching us with malicious intent. Judging by his size, I figured Paul could handle just about anyone. But from the way his head nodded, I realized he'd made sure he had plenty of cover after all. The waiter came over and we ordered drinks. Sitting with my back to most of the room was uncomfortable because I could only look at the stage where a small band was playing. I actually wanted to scrutinize everyone present, but that might have given away the game. We were brought drinks, and the four of us made small talk, mostly about my delayed flight, during at least 2 sets of the band. "That's no good. I think we'll have to up the ante," said Paul finally. "Didn't they see us?" asked Holly. "They're too into themselves. I don't think they've said a word to the rest of their party since we got here." "Come on, you two, do a Fred and Ginger impersonation," suggested Della. "And watch your step." I held out my hand and Holly grasped it as we both stood. "I should warn you that I'm not Gene Kelly, Holly," I warned her. "I'm sure you'll do fine, love," Holly replied with a smirk. "A lover?" I asked. "So that's what you're supposed to be this evening, isn't it?" "Oh yeah, it's a damn shame we have to play these silly games, isn't it?" "Who's playing?" With a wink, Holly wrapped her arms around my neck from behind and pulled me to her. If only, thought I to myself. God, if the guys in the office could see me now. It was nearing the end of the band's 3rd set since our arrival, and they were playing a slower number. "Oh my God, did I really do that?" asked Holly, squeezing into me. "Sorry, but desirable women usually do that to me," I replied, blushing slightly. I can't say we actually danced in the literal sense. We just swayed in one place, spinning in slow circles. I have to say it was one of the most enjoyable dances I've had in years. Suddenly, another couple bumped into us slightly. "You've been spotted," the guy whispered when they did. Looking at him, I saw that it was one of the couples who had cleared a table for us when we entered. Looking the other way, it appeared that another couple from the table was dancing on the other side of us. "Careful, you might look in the wrong place. Focus on dancing with your partner. We'll deal with whatever happens," the first guy warned me. I went back to looking at Holly, who smiled charmingly back at me. "Holly, you're one hell of an actress," I thought to myself. "You know, I hope the balloon doesn't go up too fast. I like that," I told her. "I can feel it, lover," she said with a cheeky grin and pressed her crotch even harder against mine. "I wonder if you have sadistic tendencies, Holly?" I commented, smiling. "I like to tease my men, Mike. This evening was the best I could think of." I don't know what expression appeared on my face, but it made Holly laugh out loud. I wished I really was the man she was teasing, but I knew the good Lord could never look at me that favorably. "Don't look so dejected, Mike. After all, there's no rush to get back to the UK, is there? We can always take a few days to enjoy the Florida sunshine. Now that we've been spotted, let's make it look really good." In the next instant, Holly's head was on my shoulder, and she began to nibble on my neck and earlobe. "Hey, take it easy, girl, or I'll have an accident," I warned her. Holly giggled in response, and what's more, she didn't stop her caresses. What's more, she doubled them. To my relief, the band's performance ended before I lost control of myself, and the guy who had been talking to us on the dance floor suggested we go back to our table. I assumed the rest of Paul's band was around. Holly headed toward the table, holding my hand and pulling me along with her. When we got closer, Paul motioned for us to sit down, but his eyes were fixed on something happening across the room. "That's right, he's on his way. When he gets here, you can stand there and argue with him, but don't raise your hand at him, Mike. We'll deal with any rough stuff. That's what we're paid to do," said Paul, leaning forward in his chair. "Is she coming?" I asked. "No, I don't think she's realized it's you yet. That's assuming she saw you at all, since she was standing with her back to the dance floor. But she's watching closely now, so she'll probably spot you as soon as you stand up and turn around. What the hell is going on here, Holly? What are you doing here, and what the hell do you think you're playing at with that freak? Who is he anyway? Came an angry voice from somewhere over my left shoulder. I stood up and turned to face the guy, fully aware that Paul had gotten up at the same time. But the moment I turned around, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something else. Later, I realized that all the guys at the next table suddenly had gold shield-shaped badges on the breast pockets of their jackets. Only later did I learn that they were the badges of the local police, but I didn't realize their significance at the time. Holly danced with that asshole, just as no doubt you danced with my wife. Yeah, that was the best I could come up with at that moment. I didn't yet know what I wanted to say when the confrontation started. Holly, who was also standing, had obviously rehearsed her little speech well, and will probably have sex with him later while you have sex with your wife in room 642. By the way, 643 is right across the hall, but we'll try not to make as much noise as you two did last night. Holly smiled and put her arm around my waist. I really could have done without Holly at that point, because I figured that her husband, and he was much larger than I had anticipated, might well have pounced on me, and Holly holding on to me kind of limited my room to maneuver. But I shouldn't have bothered with him. Avril's appearance on the scene, I suppose after she spotted me as soon as I stood up, was far more, exciting. Honestly, Avril came out of nowhere and ran headfirst into me. And Holly's husband fell off his feet as she threw him out of the way. In a way, it was convenient, because it took some of the momentum away from Avril. Old Holly ended up lying on some poor woman's lap before collapsing to the floor. Of course I didn't see it. I was lying on the floor myself, looking at my very angry wife. I think the tumble to the floor that Avril and I took shook her a little as much as it did me. Anyway, she ended up laying on top of me, gazing up into my face. "What the hell were you doing with that slut?" she demanded. Demanded she. "Dancing, what did it look like?" I replied, still without the jazz reprise. "It looked like you were trying to gorge yourself on a brownie," she replied. "Come on, Avril, I just got here. I haven't had a chance yet. You've been sleeping with her husband for the last 2 days at least." I was pleased with myself. I had managed to make the first successful leap. But don't be so stupid, Mike. Where did you get this stupid idea?" said Avril, rolling off me and sitting up. "How did you even get here? You don't fly, do you?" Movement to my eye was extremely difficult. Wherever I looked, I saw only the legs and feet of people. "Yes, when you need to catch your wife with her lover," I replied. I was good at those answers. "It's nothing, Mike. You know I'm here on a business trip." "Avril, your business trip was to Houston, and this is bleeding Florida. Neither you nor your company has any business in Miami. You had a meeting in Houston, and then you flew here with a gold digger wherever he was headed." There were so many of Paul's men around that I lost sight of Holly's husband for a moment. "And the last 2 nights you've been doing the horizontal tango with that bastard in room 643. 642, lover, 643 is our room." Holly's voice came from somewhere. "Yes, sorry, room 642. Would you like to see the tapes, Avril?" I asked. I didn't know if Holly had tapes from this trip, but I knew she had plenty of tapes from their previous dates. I figured Avril wouldn't want to see them. Avril just sat on the floor and stared at me. I have to admit it was the first time I'd ever seen her at a loss for words. No, that's a lie. I remember the first time I went to bed with her, before we were even married. When I was done with her, she lay there speechless. I always thought I had shaken all the chatter out of her. Well, that couldn't disappoint her. She came back for more the next night and eventually married me. It's just a pity. Suddenly, hands helped us to our feet, and the next thing I realized, except that Holly had her arm around my waist again, was Paul saying, "Morgan Ardent, you're being served." And he held out an envelope to Holly's rather disheveled husband. I wondered what I'd missed to make Morgan so disheveled. Paul then promptly did the same with Avril. Although our British divorce petitions don't have to be filed as formally as the Yanks do, I could send them by registered letter. Holly and I just thought it would brighten up the party a bit if we did it officially and at the same time as handing the papers to her husband. Then the 2 guys with Holly and Morgan, who followed the lovers along with the rest of their company, were handed the paperwork. Holly took care of everything. Avril and Morgan worked for an American company, so we both sued them in an American court for turning a blind eye to what was going on with the couple. Of course, with their bosses who were served papers were their girlfriends. I guess the damn company had to turn a blind eye. Finally, Paul handed Morgan Ardent the suit for alienation of affection that Holly's lawyers had filed in the American courts on my behalf. It had been years since anyone had successfully pulled something like this off in the UK. Just as suddenly as it started, it ended. I have no idea where or when Avril disappeared to. Holly said she was taken away crying by one of her boss's guys, but I never saw her leave. I did see Holly's husband being taken away by two guys. Not before he gave me a look that I figured would turn me to stone. "So what's going to happen now?" I asked Holly. "We're dancing," she replied with a smirk and dragged me towards the dance floor again. The rest of the evening turned into a bit of a party. When we got back to the table, Paul and Della sort of introduced us to all their cop friends, but didn't go into detail. They knew who we were anyway. Della explained to me as I danced with her that, as they'd hoped, all those police badges kept old Holly from taking a swing at anyone. Judging by the state he was in the last time I'd seen him, I had to wonder if he'd taken a swing at anyone else while I was on the floor with Avril. Some of the women at the party were also police officers, and I had a fascinating conversation with one of them when I danced with her later. She told me that a few years ago she had been shot while dealing with a domestic dispute. "I shot his balls off," she replied when I asked her what happened. "We were taught that if you're forced to fire a shot, you should empty the cartridge case. There's no point in risking them having time to fire a second shot." "Where did he shoot?" I asked. "Would you believe it? I had to have my nipple reconstructed." "God, lucky he didn't kill you," I commented, thinking that if the bullet had hit her in the chest, it must have traveled very close to her heart. "The damn thing hit my badge first and then deflected onto my chest. I don't know if that damn badge saved my life or made it worse." "Christ, what did your husband say about it?" "Not so much. He himself got shot in the ass a few years ago. The bullet is still in him. They sent him away for that reason." "I bet he wasn't happy about it." "No, Paul's quite happy. He's a qualified lawyer now, but he's more interested in doing all those private investigators." "Paul is your husband. Then who is Della?" "I assumed Della was Paul's wife. I have no idea why." "My sister. She's an ex-cop too, quit when she had her first child. I never got up the courage to ask under what circumstances Paul got shot in his jacket. I found that American police officers like to have a drink or two. It was a little disconcerting that they all seemed to carry guns. Not that they were waving them around or anything. I have no idea what time the party ended. I'm afraid I had too much to drink myself. But I remember a disappointing conversation we overheard in the elevator. One of the hotel employees was telling the couple how lucky they were. The hotel was full, but for some reason the couple in room 642 had suddenly checked out. The housekeeping staff was still in room 642 when Holly, Paul, Della, and I went into room 643. "Well, that takes away what remains of the evening's fun," said Holly. "I couldn't wait to see their faces when we leave this room together in the morning." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. It might give their lawyers leverage in court," commented Paul. "Paul, I have enough information about what those two have been up to in the last 6 months to get 2 divorces. Besides, I have the prenup my father insisted on. He never had a high opinion of Morgan." "Yeah, but what about Mike because they don't have prenuptial agreements in the UK?" "I'm on the losing end either way, Paul. My lawyer thinks everything will be split 50-50. The only clearing in the sky is that Avril makes more money than I do." I told them. "I think heads will fly in this company, and Morgan and Avril will be at the top of the list. My uncle is a big stockholder, and he's already on the case," Holly informed us. "I barely managed to keep him from rushing in, or we would have missed out on the fun tonight." "Not much actually happened. There weren't many fireworks." "Quite a lot of expense on your part, Holly, for something that could have been done at home," I said, voicing my thoughts. "Now, Mike, the look on Morgan's face when you said he slept with your wife was classic." "He had no idea who you were." "Did I say that?" "No, not in those terms. You're too much of a gentleman." "But I did." The look on Morgan's face when he realized that it wasn't he who had caught me, but I, or rather we, had caught them, was something. And then Avril flew into the house like a linebacker during a home run. The funniest thing I've seen in a long time, said Holly, and laughed out loud. Holly, I don't know much about American sports, but I thought linebackers played American soccer and home runs scored in baseball, I remarked. Ah, we have something else in common. I've never been a sports fan either, replied Holly. I think we've all noticed, Holly, commented Della. We chatted for God knows how long about nothing in particular, but eventually headed to bed. I should say that room 643 was a suite. I had one bedroom and Holly had the other. When we went to bed, Paul and Della were sitting in the living room. When we got up in the morning, Mona, Paul's wife, had replaced Della, who I assume had gone home to her children. Apparently, Paul was an officer of the court. I have no idea what that means. But I realized that in American courts, his word would be taken almost as gospel. I mean, he could swear that Holly and I didn't spend the night in the same bed. The original plan was for us to meet Morgan and Avril in the morning when they came out of their hotel room. But they ran away, and that plan was canceled. So, Mike, what are your plans? Asked Holly at breakfast. I'm not sure. I guess I'll go home to lick my wounds, I replied. Well, lovers spread out. Why don't you and I fly to Vegas for a few days before you head home? Great idea, Holly, but I don't want to fly back to the UK as it is. Sorry, but adding another flight to Las Vegas is not my idea of a good time. Holly sat pensive for a few moments. Flying makes you so upset, doesn't it? Okay, alternative idea. A close friend of mine has a house in the Bahamas. Why don't we go there for a few days? Don't worry, we can go by boat and you won't even have to risk me driving. I had to think about this question, but not for long. After traveling across the Atlantic, it would be foolish to fly straight back to the UK, considering that I still had almost 2 weeks of summer vacation left. I had to get home as soon as possible, because when Avril got home, she'd probably be in for a real old spat. The house was already on the market, and I was transferring cash everywhere to keep her from emptying all the joint accounts. Don't forget that my attorney oversaw all the changes I made. I would still get screwed. His job was to keep me from going broke. Yeah, why not? A nice ferry cruise should be fun. But can you just show up uninvited at a friend's house like that? Of course, I have a standing invitation. I don't attend as often as I should. But how about you take me with you? Oh, they'll probably like you better than Morgan. They never thought much of him. Holly replied with a smirk. Did I say ferry? The cab dropped us off at what I assumed was a fancy cabin cruiser or even a private yacht. It turned out to be some kind of charter fishing boat, and it had impressive speed. During the trip to the Bahamas, Holly spent most of her time sunbathing on the foredeck in a tiny bikini. I spent most of my time on the bridge, where the captain was ostensibly showing me how to steer the boat, while in reality, we were admiring Holly's slender body with the other crew members. Daddy, said Holly, hugging the older guy who met us at the boardwalk. This is Mike. His wife Morgan played with him. Holly introduced us. Hey, son. He shook my hand and then Holly's. I told you could never trust that little shit. But no, you always thought you knew best. Okay, Mike, let's go back inside and change into some appropriate clothes. I realized that my business suit was not considered appropriate attire for the Bahamas. In the house, a large dilapidated structure that bore little resemblance to a house I had been to before, I met Holly's mother, who greeted me like a long-lost son. It was disconcerting to my reserved English nature. Things got a little more formal, though, when Holly's father escorted me to my room. Let's just say he made sure I understood where my room was. And it was where he and his wife expected me to sleep. Well, you got it! The next 4 days were very enjoyable. When Holly and I weren't sunbathing or swimming in her father's pool, I was either fishing from the same boat that ferried us here with Holly's father. Or in the evenings, we attended numerous cocktail parties. At some of them, Holly danced with me, but she was a little more chaste than she had been that first night at the Miami hotel. The last night before we left, Holly and I somehow ended up walking along the beach under the moonlight. We weren't in each other's arms or anything, but she was holding my hand. We talked about how upset I was that my divorce was going to cost me the house that I had spent so many years remodeling to fit Avril and my idea of what a house should be. Although Avril always let me do whatever I wanted to do with the house, Avril just picked the color schemes and everything. The outbuilding and even the kitchen and bathrooms were always my plan, as was the garage and workshop. How I will miss that workshop. Mike, do I want to apologize? Said Holly suddenly. What's there to apologize for, Holly? Well, that first night in Miami, I got a little ahead of myself. Holly, we were both very nervous about what was going to happen. I think we both drank a little more than we should have and said some things we shouldn't have. It helped mask our nervousness. That's all we have to worry about. I know, but I'd hate for you to think I'm flirting with someone like that. Damn, don't be silly, girl. I understand perfectly. I owe you an apology. I didn't control myself like I should have. I noticed, big boy, she replied with another adorable giggle. Anyway, we're not the type to give in to our baser instincts like Morgan and Avril, are we? Absolutely not, Holly. We've been together for almost 5 days and we haven't kissed once since that first night. Why do you think that is? I'm not sure. You're a very attractive woman and I enjoyed being the official smudger of your lipstick last night. But we have to take into account that we're both in what you might call a rebound relationship. How many relationships do you know that would last if they started under those circumstances? Yeah, I have to admit that they usually lead to heartache for everyone in the end, said Holly quietly. Besides, we're both still married, Holly, although our spouses don't seem to notice that fact. Yes, you're right. We're above that kind of behavior, aren't we? With regret, replied I. Does that mean you can't smudge my lipstick at least once before you leave? Holly, I sure as hell told you I'd love to apply for a full-time position as a lipstick smudger. I spent the next half hour or so watching to see how smudged I could make Holly's lipstick look. Only I think Holly was trying to find out if my tonsils were still intact by using her tongue as a probe. By the time we got back to her parents' house, we were acting like cronies. The next day, the same boat took us back to the mainland, and at what seemed like an even faster speed than the transportation. Holly then came with me to the airport and accompanied me on my flight back to the UK. Yeah, I smeared Holly's lipstick again before boarding the flight. Avril was waiting for me when I eventually made it back to the house. Surprisingly, there weren't many fireworks. Hey, sorry, Mike, I messed up, didn't I? Said Avril, looking very subdued when I found her in the kitchen. I just can't understand why, Avril. I thought we were doing well here. Yeah, Mike, I just got carried away with my work. I'm sorry, it all went to my head. I really didn't intend to cheat on you or anything. Jesus, Mike, I still love you. Yes, so what feelings do you have for him? Damn, please don't ask. He flattered and seduced me. I acted like a stupid schoolgirl. Did you? You know, with his wife? Avril, was all I had to say. Hell, I might have known you wouldn't do that. Now you're going to tell me we don't stand a chance, aren't you? You know me better than I know myself, Avril. When do I move out, or are you leaving? If you don't bring either of your lovers here, Avril, we can both live here until the house is sold. It will give us both time to find some half-decent place to live. Divorce? I'm willing to change the grounds to irreconcilable differences if we can come to an amicable agreement on finances. This will allow us to divorce quickly. Get the papers out and show me where to sign, Mike. I messed up, so I won't give you any more trouble, Avril said with resignation in her voice. That was the end of it. The divorce took place in a matter of months. The house had not been on the market for long. It had been on the market for almost 2 months when a real estate agent came along and bought it on behalf of his client. The strange guy never struck me as a real estate agent. In any case, we never even saw the buyers or learned their names. After much negotiation, he even bought almost all the furniture. I was moving into rented accommodation, and Avril, having been fired by her employer, suddenly found herself being hunted by another American company. She left England for California before the divorce was finalized. I don't know, maybe 2 months after the Nisi ruling, I got a call from the agent of the people who bought our house. It seems my client is having trouble understanding the controls of the central heating system, Mr. Crosby. We were wondering if you could come in tonight and explain to them how to set it up, he asked. I don't see why they're having trouble. It's a pretty standard system. But then again, that damn electronic timer is hard to figure out. Yeah, tell them I'll stop by tonight on my way home from work and see if I can help. By the way, what are their names? I asked. Thank you, Mr. Crosby. I'll tell them to expect you about 6:30. Goodbye, he replied, whereupon the line dropped. Weird. I remember thinking, how the hell did he know I'd get there at 6:30? When I lived there, I always came home from work at that time. And the bastard hung up on me without telling me his name. The garden looked pretty much the same when I moved in. That is, if you ignore the little sign proudly informing everyone that the new owner uses a local gardening company to mow the lawns, etc. There were no cars on the road, so I parked in the same spot. With a heavy heart, I went to the front door and pressed the bell. You know, it's really weird to go back to a house you used to live in and find yourself ringing the doorbell instead of just putting the key in the lock and letting yourself in. Who's there? The voice came from behind the closed door. Mike Crosby, I snapped back. I'm here to explain what a heating system is. I could hear all the locks and deadbolts I had installed on the door with my own hands being pushed back and undone. Screams, most of them were for when we went to bed or left the house empty. I didn't realize anyone would use them all the time. Eventually, the door opened, and a young woman of about 18 with a very thick Eastern European accent opened the door and motioned for me to come in. The mistress is waiting in the parlor. The young woman said it very precisely, as if she had rehearsed it. Then she giggled and ran off toward the kitchen. With a knock, I opened the living room door and stepped into the room. I'm Mike Crosby. I believe you have a problem with the central heating, I said to the woman standing with her back to me, looking out into the back garden. No, the heating is working fine, Mike. What I really need is someone to smudge my lipstick, she said, turned and walked into my arms. Epilogue. It's funny how things can turn out. I never got to spend another night alone in my apartment. Holly and I were married less than 2 months later. I don't work in a hospital anymore. I'm now the joint representative for Holly's father, along with Holly, in the UK and Europe. This guy has gotten involved in just about everything you can think of. To be honest, I'm out of my depth most of the time, though I'm adopting Holly's expertise as I go along. Really not much unless you count the flag display. I have a feeling that old Holly is just making sure I can afford to keep Holly in the shape she's used to. Be that as it may, I have to put on my socks quickly and get things out in the open. In a few months, Holly will have to stop chasing me all over Europe. You can't drag a kid around like that, can you? No, I'm still not flying if I can help it. Honestly, life since we got married has been like one long car vacation, very enjoyable in the new Beamer. What do people call it? Oh yes, I think I fell on my feet and also fell in love with one of the most beautiful women in the world. We spend most nights in luxury hotels. I find the nights more exhausting than the trips. Holly can be insatiable sometimes. God knows how Morgan even found the strength to sleep with Avril. But Holly insists I'm much better than Morgan in that regard. Maybe he never gave Holly and her needs the attention she deserved. Sometimes I think my new wife has a very twisted sense of humor. One morning I was coming out of the bathroom at home and caught Holly saying thank you to a picture she had hidden in one of the dresser drawers. She looked very embarrassed when she realized I had noticed her. I, of course, asked who was in the picture. Would you believe it? It's your ex-wife Avril. Holly replied with a smile. Well, Mike, you have to admit that if Avril hadn't let Morgan get her into his bed, I never would have found you, would I? I'll always have sympathy for her, you know? You have to agree it's a very different way of looking at things. I walked over to Holly's dresser and picked up the picture. Thank you, Avril. I never thought that having you run around and cheat on me could lead to me being so happy, said I. Then I put the picture back in the drawer and turned my attention to the woman who really mattered to me. It must have been almost lunchtime when we came up for air again and went downstairs for breakfast. Lord, how tired was I? Life goes on.